What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about the upcoming Grim Darkness challenge for Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, as it is something I'll be participating in, and given that and the fact that I don't know how many people actually know about it, I thought I'd discuss it a little bit, what it is, what the rules are, some things I personally have in mind for it, etc. But basically, the Grim Darkness challenge for this game is an official competition held by Owlcat Games, the developer, for content creators for Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, of course. Utilizing, though, the recent Iron Man mode that was added with one of these past few updates. The free base game update that accompanied the DLC, if I remember correctly. Which is to say, this is effectively an Iron Man challenge. But an official one, of course. Now, if you've been with the channel a really long time, you may just remember that I actually participated in one of these for Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous as well. And this competition is largely going to be the same as that one. As almost everything about the rules and everything is the same, I'll be streaming it right here on YouTube, etc. Now, right away though, officially this challenge kicks off tomorrow on October 22nd and it runs through November 4th. Personally though, I won't be able to jump into it until probably right around Halloween, like maybe the 29th, 30th, or Halloween itself, somewhere in there. I'm very busy with another time-sensitive project that is currently eating up all of my time. So while this starts tomorrow, I will be a little bit late, which, truth be told, might work out in my favor a little bit. Now, unlike with Wrath of the Righteous, where I kind of scheduled it out in individual little chunks, I plan on trying to tackle as much of this one as possible pretty much right out of the gate until we die or I simply knock the game out so we can all move on. And because I'll be pressed for time a little bit because the competition might end. Now, on the bright side, that is kind of going to inadvertently allow me to see where everybody else dies. And we'll talk about, I think, potential pain points for the run here in just a moment. But first I want to get into the rules. Now, it should go without saying, but Grim Darkness mode needs to be enabled. This is going to be on daring difficulty. The Wrath of the Righteous competition was on normal, which was alright, but not as exciting as it could be. The Void Shadows DLC has to be active. If you're unaware, you don't technically have to activate that DLC for the base game, but for this competition, that's part of it. It's got to be installed and active. The free and cosmetic DLCs are fine. Any character selection choices are cool. That includes ship types. Only single player, obviously this isn't a multiplayer challenge, even though multiplayer is available for this game. You cannot use mercenaries, you can only use the actual companions, so you can't just hire a bunch of mercs to use some cheese strat, and you also can't use mods, of course. But also, in keeping with the spirit of the competition, all choices and their consequences are final. Meaning that you can't do anything that would cause you to reload and try something again, basically. Gotta let the RNG be what it's gonna be. And behind the scenes, every person involved in this has to send some information to Owlcat after every session to basically keep everybody honest, and also, of course, tally up scores with where everyone actually is. Now, the way they're judging who's winning is first and foremost by whoever makes it the farthest in-game, ideally by beating the game, but also just by whoever reached the furthest act in the game, otherwise if everyone dies. And then if multiple people got to the same final act or beat the game, they're then going to resolve those tiebreakers by the number of quests that have been completed. This is actually what got me in the Wrath of the Righteous competition. If you're unaware, I think it was like 4th place in that. Not because I didn't beat the game. I did, in fact, beat the game. Like a good 30, 40 hours faster than everybody else, but I was a couple of quests behind. And unfortunately for me, time played was the secondary tiebreaker. So if people were still tied after tallying up the quest, they then used simply whoever did it the fastest. And if those were swapped around, I would have smoked everybody in that Wrath of the Righteous competition. I was so far ahead of them time-wise. But that's kind of the general rules, what to expect and everything. So next up, I want to talk about some general pain points that I foresee during this run, places where I think people are likely to die a lot, but also just in general can be tricky to navigate. Now, some of these are pretty easy to spot. For starters, right towards the beginning of the game, there's that fight with the end of Act 1 boss, Aurora. As even on just plain old normal difficulty, if he starts that fight with an opening salvo, that you just get a lot of bad rolls on, he can pretty much decimate your entire team in about a single turn. And unfortunately, if you get bad RNG on that opener, there's really just not much you can do to overcome it. So if I had to guess, that will be this game's version of the water elemental that killed everybody in Wrath of the Righteous. And that's assuming you even get that far, because there are 1 or 2 tricky fights leading up to that fight, which again, RNG being what it is, sometimes doesn't work out. But that's just the first part of the game. When you start getting into Act 2, something I think will catch a lot of people is a couple of the fights in Footfall. If you get into them a little too early, especially the fights with the Anvers gang, because they have all those flamethrowers and everything, and if you're not set up to deal with that, they can be very, very annoying, and you can simply get outnumbered and overwhelmed real easily. But assuming you make it off the station relatively unscathed, you then have to deal with void ship combat. Void ship combat, I think, is going to catch a lot of people, mostly because the, let's say, dispersion of the void ship battles in Act 2 is a little hit or miss. It's easy to get into fights you probably shouldn't be doing, and that includes that hulking void ship, which is an explorable area right near where you start that particular area at, but if you go straight into that without leveling up first, you're probably going to get absolutely destroyed by that Forge Fiend. So those two are going to be significant problems. Now, then there's all of Act 3. All of Act 3 is rough. Specifically, the start of it more so than the rest, though. In particular, though, the start of Act 3 is really troublesome because there's a lot of ways to die in dialogue right there if you don't have the appropriate stats to work your way out of it. And if you're just clicking through things quickly, it's actually pretty easy to die right there without even engaging combat. But assuming you make it through that, you then have to fight several battles where you are very short-handed until you gather all your companions back up because of the way that act starts. So the opening of Act 3 is really, really rough. Now, luckily, once you get done with Act 3, I do think things smooth out quite a bit, because much of Act 4 really isn't that bad until you get to the very last part of it, where you have to start battling chaos on a planet that's been taken over, and the fight at the end of that in particular, plus just the fights leading up to it, are all fairly challenging. I would say that's a big difficulty spike, if anything. And the fight at the end of it in particular, though, is another fight just like the end of Act 1, where that opening turn can be pretty make or break. You can go in there and just get wrecked and not even really have the chance to react or do anything if things don't go your way. Now, after that, it's relatively smooth sailing because that brings you to the last act of the game, Act 5. Truth be told, I think the ship battles in Act 5 will probably kill more people than anything else, because Act 5 in terms of combat encounters really isn't that bad. Though admittedly, I have not played the last boss fight since they made a lot of the changes to the action economy, which is another thing I want to get into now. So what's my approach for this? Am I doing anything special, build-wise, etc.? And the answer is kind of. So I played the game quite a bit for the release of the recent DLC, Void Shadows. Void Shadows introduced a bunch of new mechanics on its own, but prior to Void Shadows, they also did a big overhaul of the combat system, including several very overpowered abilities. Now, I don't want to break anybody's heart, but I was using those overpowered abilities when I played the game the first time. Well, first several times, I should say. Which means I'm not exactly up to date on what the meta is at this point, but I did get a little bit acquainted with some stuff in the Void Shadows DLC because I had to play through that, obviously. Now, there is a build I have in mind for my main character, which is a pyromancer into executioner, utilizing that new archetype they put out, because there's an interaction that I found when I was doing the Void Shadow stuff between pyromancer and executioner that hits everybody on the battlefield with no real way for them to dodge or block or do anything. And it's really fun to mess around with. I wouldn't say it's the most effective build in the world, but it is a very fun time, and I want to see if I can make it happen. Now, what scares me about that build, though, is that it's a fairly standard pyromancer until you start getting up there in levels, because the abilities you need to make that work take a little while to get your hands on. Now, for everybody else, we'll probably play it by ear. I know I want to use our faithful Seneschal Abelard, as well as our new companion Cabela, as her default archetype is really strong on its own, and then I'll probably use the Navigator Cassia, of course, and then we'll kind of figure it out from there. While we're speaking about that, though, I'm probably going to go with a mostly dogmatic playthrough, just because that's the one I personally enjoy the most, but also because a lot of its abilities and everything complement the type of psyker I want to build really, really well. But dogmatic in general just tends to be the one I enjoy the most. But as it stands, that's kind of where my head's at and what I'm thinking about as I move to take this particular challenge on when I get to actually starting it. But beyond that, I don't want to get too much further into like min-maxing it. Really, I do want the challenge to actually be fun. Because personally, I think with stuff like this, when you get really deep in the weeds of do this thing at this exact level, otherwise we won't win, is just not really fun to me, so I'm just not going to be doing that. Which, truth be told, I think is where their changes to the combat system might come in clutch more than anything else, because I'm not super familiar with all the abilities like I used to be. I mean, I still know them pretty well because I've played the game before, but comparatively, like I mentioned, I'm simply not up on the meta right now. And I plan to keep it that way just to see how we do here. But as for right now, that's basically everything to know about this challenge, everything I wanted to say about it, so hopefully you got something out of that. And remember, while the challenge starts tomorrow, it'll take me about a week before I actually jump into it, but in the meantime, if you want to check out anybody else streaming, I believe Owlcat will likely post an update on all the participants and everything soon. I know they have a lot of returning people from the Wrath of the Righteous competition, as well as a bunch of new signups, so I think it'll be a good time. But for right now, that's pretty much going to do it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, or you simply want to watch the competition, I guess, like, comment, subscribe, stick around, it'll be right here on YouTube. Otherwise, I'd simply love to know what you think about it. But regardless of all that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.